Bergman recently penned an article entitled "The Ugly, the Bad and the Good, the State of the AgTech and FoodTech Sector in 2026. In the ugly section of your piece, you describe zombie companies that have been propped up by investors in the vain hope that things might get better.
Those zombie companies probably are going to come to an end. I think what we've seen over the last few years is a lot of these companies had raised a lot of capital but hadn't really delivered on their business. And over the last year or two, you've seen a number of these companies go out and raise a safe round from internal investors just to keep them going for 12 months, but they weren't really making any progress. And now we're getting to the point where these companies have been doing safe rounds for 1 or 2 years or even longer, and we're not seeing any real market traction. So now their investors are having to get to the point where they realize, we're not getting traction. But they're also getting to another point, which is the financing market is not changing, and it is closed for most companies, and it's very difficult to raise new capital, and that's not going to change in 26, and it might not even change in 27. One of the keys is going to be, can these companies get to a size where they actually have some profitability? Because with profitability, we can get to them running without needing new capital, or we can get to a point where some of them can achieve exits.
Are these zombie companies that kind of deserve to be consigned to the scrap heap, or are these companies that just needed longer and the timelines aren't working?
So the answer is both. Definitely this is a sector that's going to need a long time to build companies successfully. But I think what also is apparent is that a lot of companies might have been funded with an expectation that they were going to change and achieve some scientific breakthroughs that just haven't happened. So I think a lot of the companies could succeed if they were given another 5 to 10 years, maybe some even longer, but there definitely are going to be some you could give them 3 decades and they're going to still not have been able to build a business.
Fair enough. So in the bad section of your article, you note that a lack of exits has created a vicious circle. What do you mean, and how do we get out of it?
Yeah, so explaining what has happened is much easier than giving solutions to get out of here. What's happened is you've had a lot of investors put money to work in companies, and they've continued to fund these companies, but the challenge is very few of the companies have got to any level of scale where they can achieve an exit. And a lot of investors would have gone back and looked at 2017 and 2018 when the likes of Blue River and Granular, and then later Bear Flag Robotics and Prospera were able to get sales of 250 to 300 million off a few $1 million of revenue. They were really technology sales. We're not seeing those today. I think today we call those acqui-hires, that you are going to spend a couple $1 million and bring a team in rather than buying this company for a lot. So we've got to a point where there's not a lot of exits. And again, back to what I talked about the zombie companies, you're not seeing a lot of companies who have achieved scale, who have EBITDA or profitability and cash flow. So it's not really attractive to a lot of buyers, and that's what the problem is. We're at a point where the corporates, and if you look at the corporates, whether they are the big ag chem guys, the Bayers, and the Syngentas, and FMCs, and people of that nature, a lot of them are in trouble. The Bayer-Monsanto merger hasn't gone as well. Syngenta is wrapped up in Chem China. FMC is having financial problems. Corteva's in the middle of splitting. There's not a lot of buyers there. So all of a sudden, you have a lack of corporate buyers, and the other buyers, because there's a lot in traditional ag and traditional food, is PE, but PE is not going to come near this sector because it doesn't have EBITDA or cash flow. They're not going to buy early stage businesses that, in their mind, have lots of risk. So we're at a really difficult time where we're not seeing exits. And when there's no exits, you have two issues. One, the funds that are out there that have capital, they're hoarding their capital for their existing portfolio companies because they understand those portfolio companies will struggle to raise new outside capital. And those funds that have actually deployed all the capital are struggling to raise new capital because LPs look at the numbers and say, if this sector raised $40 billion and to date you've probably had 8 to 10 billion go into companies that went bankrupt, and you've probably returned 2 billion of the money. Well, if you have 40 and you've returned 2 billion, it's not a good number, and that's why we're struggling to see new capital coming in because the exits haven't been there.
I mean, this is rather a depressing picture that you're painting. Is there light at the end of this tunnel?
So I think there's light at the end of the tunnel, but I think we have to realize it's not a 5 to 10 year time horizon. This tunnel is probably 10 to 20 year time horizon, and we're in that 5 10-year for most companies, and I think we really need to understand that it's just going to take longer. Companies and investors, it's cost a lot, but have learned a lot of lessons that are going to make them companies much better and investors much smarter as they build the company of the future.
So, you touched on it here, but every conference has got this panel ruminating on whether the VC model kind of fits food and ag, and does it? And if not, what other funding sources can be tapped instead? What does a more sensible model look like if we need one?
I think the best starting option for early stage companies is try to figure out how they go and get grants. I think people don't appreciate what a $500,000, $1 million grant can mean for a company, rather than having to go out and take venture, which to some degree they'll struggle to find. But starting your capital flow with non-dilutive capital is the best place to begin. But if you're going out to raise it, you're going to look towards corporate strategics, and I know the CVCs are less active than they used to be, but I think there's a lot of value to trying to find the right corporate partner, and it's not just the 5 or 6 names who show up at this conference. There's a lot of corporates out there who see value there. Additionally, we see some activity on family offices. The challenge with most family offices is they do not lead deals. They're more likely to follow, so you still need a lead. And then the other area is sector-specific venture. So people who understand food and ag, maybe they still try to invest into an under 15-year time horizon, but they actually understand it better and can help build businesses that will fit into that model. But those are the main sources today.
So, in the good section of your article, you say you remain pretty bullish on the sector long term. I mean, you've touched on that. We've all got to eat right, but are there any particular drivers there that give you that kind of confidence?
Yeah. So there is a future here, and I think the industry has a bright future, and that's because we have 4 different areas that I think are mega trends that are positively impacting this area. So these are the tailwinds rather than the good, the ugly, and the bad being the headwinds. So first being the focus on food security. And I think food security is going to be more and more important. We saw it back in 2022 rise to the forefront when Russia invaded Ukraine, and we saw a number of countries start stopping the flow of exports of agricultural products.
And see with COVID as well, I guess.
Correct.
Before then,
And that was a big thing, because if you go back to World War II, between World War II and that time, the food system had globalized. It became much more global. We saw a sea change. And by the way, we started seeing that sea change back, I think it was in 2012 in the Arab Spring, when you saw a number of countries in Northern Africa who could not feed their people fall. And I think we saw a change in the GCC countries reflecting on that to say, we need food security because we don't want the same thing to happen. So I think food security is a huge area, and I'll just say it's a topic I talk about a lot, even domestically in the US. We're not focusing enough on, but it's an issue here even.
And I suppose it's top of mind at the moment with war in the Middle East as well. So. With
war in the Middle East, but if you look at the price of beef, why is beef so expensive? Because we have the least amount of cattle that we've had since World War II. So that's one. Number 2 is health and nutrition. It's very clear that GLP-1 is not a fad. It is a trend, and focus on health has risen to the forefront. We've seen in this administration, Robert F. Kennedy has taken the mantle of MAHA and is pushing health and nutrition to levels I don't think anyone would have thought of. I often joke that who would have thought that the person leading the health and nutrition revolution would be Donald Trump's administration as he eats his McDonald's hamburgers. It's not something any of us would have thought. But they are, and they are really pushing a lot of these innovations. And by the way, they're needed because we can't continue paying the healthcare costs of a society where 60% of Americans are overweight and 40% are obese. It's just not economic. So this is really important, and you're going to see innovations with GLP-1 that's not going to only impact the medical side from a health side, but you're going to see it's going to impact how we eat, what we eat, the amount we eat, and it's going to have a real impact on the CPG sector. Third area is sustainable food systems. So we're at a time when we have a growing population. I don't think it's growing as quickly as people thought it might a couple decades ago, but it's still growing. And we're not going to have any more land, any more water, and we can't use more crop chemicals than we do today. So we're at a point where we know how many resources we're able to use, and we're going to have to find ways to grow more sustainably and viably, and there's a lot of ways we can do this. So I think that is an area people are going to talk more about, which is how do we improve resource efficiency into the agriculture sector to get more production but with less resources. And finally, and really the big driver that wraps everything up, is a continued innovation on technology and biotechnology. So if you look at the innovation in technology, one of the things I often say, which is very good for this industry, is most of the technology that's being used or thought is going to be integrated is developed in other industries. I often say technology developed specifically for the ag sector takes a long time to get adoption, and it's going to be used at such low quantities that its cost is going to be high. But if you're taking automation and robotics from other industries, or you're using AI developed in other industries, you're going to have an advantage because it's going to be proven, validated, scaled, and the cost structure is going to be down, and that's going to help adoption happen because we need to get the prices down to a point where you're going to get an ROI for farmers. Same thing in biotech. The biotech sector has changed dramatically in the last 3 decades, and you see an increased focus on SynBio today. That's going to continue, and I think you're going to see lots of really interesting innovations that's going to hit throughout the whole food and ag system because of biotechnology. So the food and ag sector is going to take advantage of technology created in other areas that's going to be adapted for these areas, and I think that's going to be a huge positive.